He said, hey, I've got this great speaker who I first saw at EUCAP in 2007 and later in some of the APS conferences. And he has this fantastic presentation on Maxwell. And this being actually the 150th anniversary of the publication of Maxwell's equations, we thought, this might be something really great to do. So Janet suggested that we contact Jim Rateo, and Jim is actually the Sonnet software, and he's been studying and researching Maxwell for the past 30 years or so. He's not a paid professional historian, but he probably, I would guess, would be one of the world's experts on Maxwell, and he's got the human perspective. So I'm really looking forward to this, so I'd like to turn it over to Jim and let him take it from here. Please give him a warm applause.
Thank you, John. I'll share a story with you. One of the people that got me interested in this was L. Pierce Williams. His expertise was Faraday. And professor, he's a genuine historian, professor emeritus history, science, and technology at Cornell. And he told me about a friend of his who was a doctor that came up to him and said, Pierce, when I retire, I'm going to take up history of science. So Pierce looked at him and said, that's amazing. When I retire, I'm going to take up neurosurgery. So I am not a professional historian, but I've been doing a lot of looking around as kind of an amateur for the last 30 years or so. And there's some incredible stories that the professional historians have found and need to be told. So please view me as the storyteller for the professional historians and the history that actually happened here that is so important to us. John, you pronounced his name correctly. It's Clark. The British pronunciation for C-L-E-R-K is Clark. In American English, it's Clerk, but since he's British, I use the British pronunciation. Clark is not Maxwell's middle name. We'll return to that mystery here in a little bit. But first, I will read to you, and I read quotes in different voices so you know what's quoted and what's not. A quote from one of these four famous scientists honored on U.S. stamps, I think it was 2005. See if you can guess which one said this. Richard Fine, I'm sorry, too bad, you already know now. The most significant event of the 19th century will be Judge Maxwell's discovery of the laws of electrodynamics. The American Civil War will pale into provincial insignificance in comparison with this important scientific event of the same decade. Of course, that was Richard Feynman. He's the father and one of the originators of quantum electrodynamics. Maxwell's equations are wrong. They fail for low power, lower power, even lower, very low power. When you get down to individual photons, there's no photons in Maxwell's equations. It's a field theory. There's no quantization. Quantum electrodynamics works for everything that Maxwell's equations do, and it includes photons. So quantum electrodynamics is a successor to Maxwell's equations, but Maxwell's equations works great for everything I do, and probably everything you do, so that's what we're still going to go with, because quantum electrodynamics is really hard. We have a photon-electron interaction diagrams, Feynman diagrams, in the background of this stamp. Josiah Willard Gibbs, little known, he put on a formal basis, vector calculus. After Maxwell's death, div and curl, that stuff. Maxwell did not have formal use. He played with the concepts a little bit, but he did not have formal use of vector calculus when he wrote Maxwell's equations. Maxwell never saw Maxwell's equations in their present form. And we'll touch on that a little bit. John von Neumann's kind of my connection. He did a lot with quantum theory, but also computer architecture. And Barbara McIntosh, as far as I know, had no connection with Maxwell. She worked with DNA. However, we kind of have a connection because we're both Cornell graduates. This is, by the way, just for background, this is the 118th time I've given this presentation. How many of you have seen the presentation before? I'm just curious. Yeah? A few? Very good. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for coming again. In this presentation, I'll go over his ancestry, birth, and youth. I'll concentrate on his youth and young years, not so much on the theory. You already know the theory. Edinburgh Academy is where he took high school. He went to college at first at the University of Edinburgh and then Cambridge. He became a professor at Aberdeen. He was terminated from that position, sacked, laid off. We'll go over why, what happened here. There's some mystery still. He eventually found another position at King's College in London. And then he retired from there and was talked back into active duty, being the founding director of Cavendish Laboratory associated with Cambridge. We'll go over his illness and death, electromagnetics, and conclusion. You can download a bunch of files if you like from sciencesoftware.com. This is the only equation in the entire presentation. And the D dot, dd by dt, that's Maxwell's displacement current. There are only 4 stamps in the entire world devoted to Maxwell. I'll show all, keep an eye out. They'll all be in the presentation. The United Kingdom has no stamps for Maxwell. They even had a whole sheet, I think it was 16 fellows of the Royal Society. Maxwell didn't make the list, so the Brits need to get their act together. I'll show some images from the 1892 Encyclopedia Britannica, which Maxwell had a number of articles. I will be quoting from one of the articles later on in the presentation. But this goes back to the 1500s, a very dire time in British history. 1568, Mary, Queen of Scots, had lost her battle, a Protestant queen, Catholic queen in a Protestant country, had lost her battle to maintain control of the country, and she fled for safety against all advice to her closest living relative, Queen Elizabeth I of England. She was immediately thrown in prison. The Clarks of Aberdeen found themselves on the losing side of that battle, so they fled for their safety south of Edinburgh to Pennacook, became the Clarks of Pennacook. In the meantime, after I think it was 15 years of imprisonment, Mary, Queen of Scots was executed by Queen Elizabeth I. To give you a flavor of the times back then, chivalrous, wonderful times in the old days, no, baloney. If you have a choice with a time machine to stay here or go back into the 1600s, stay here. Average life expectancy was 35 in the 1600s, 35 years old. How many people here are under 35? Okay, we'd have about half the size of audience here if we had that life expectation back then. And give you an indication of how, there was lots of really gruesome stories. You know how the TV shows have the V on there for violence? Okay, close your ears if you don't want to hear this. Mary, Queen of Scots execution required 3 strokes. It didn't go well. Nasty, nasty times back then. And that's a mild story for the kinds of things that went on. But in the meantime, the Clarks of Pennacook established themselves there. And in Edinburgh, you can go into any museum for free. All the museums are free. And if you ever go there, I highly recommend enjoying them. They're excellent museums. In one of the museums, you can go in the front door, go around to the left and around into the back. I think it's the National Museum. And you'll see a coffin, a duplicate coffin of Mary, Queen of Scots. Beautiful coffin. The original is in Westminster Abbey. And nearby are these jewels. These are called the Pennacook jewels. They were a gift to Mary, Queen of Scots from the Clarks of Pennacook. A direct connection to Maxwell, to this very traumatic period of British history. Here's a family tree. We'll go over the circle ones more in detail. John Clark, the first baronet, Sir John Clark, the second baronet. We'll talk about George a little bit. John Clark of Eldon had a huge impact on British history that's little recognized. Come back here, James Clark Maxwell. That's actually his grandfather, same name. John Clark Maxwell, that's Maxwell's father. And here's our fellow Maxwell, which we'll spend the majority of the presentation on. But over here, Maxwell's sister, Isabella, married named Wedderburn, her daughter, Jemima, Maxwell's cousin, huge influence on Maxwell. She's such a precious gift to us today because she was a world-class artist. She made a number of paintings of Maxwell in his youth before photography. I'll show you some of those paintings. In the meantime, you're probably wondering, I promised you a presentation on Maxwell. What am I doing spending all this time on Clarks? What's the story here? It is a really bizarre story. Listen carefully, it's a little complicated. Sir John Clark, the second baronet, had a brother, William. William married Agnes Maxwell. Again, this is still in a period of time where history is really vicious. Agnes is there are feuds going on between clans in Scotland, and Agnes is the only surviving member of the Maxwell clan. She has an arranged marriage between William Clark, Sir John arranges it, between William Clark and herself, Agnes. Their daughter, Dorothea, in order to inherit the estate, Agnes is a very considerable estate in extreme southeastern Scotland. William has to take on his wife's name, so it becomes William Clark Maxwell. So his last name is Clark Maxwell. And their daughter Dorothea will now inherit the estate, but they want to keep it in the Clark line. So Sir John arranges a marriage between Sir George and Dorothea, first cousins. Okay, a little close on the little bit of a tight loop there on the family tree. Those things happen then. And Queen Victoria was married to her first cousin. Those things were allowed back then. So George marries Dorothea to take on the estate. He takes on the last name of Maxwell. Brothers and sisters are all Clarks, and you can trace the estate down by just following the Maxwell name. So our James Clark Maxwell. So Clark is not Maxwell's middle name. It's actually part of his last name. You might sometimes hear about Clark-Maxwell equations. His very close friend, P.G. Tate, I'll show you a picture later on, actually hyphenated Clark-Maxwell. Maxwell himself just wrote Clark Maxwell. So we'll go back up here to John Clark, the first baronet. Sir John Clark, I'm sorry, the sir shouldn't be there. John Clark, the first baronet, Scottish Parliament, said to have fought, I've given this presentation 118 times, that's the first time I've noticed that mistake. Member of Scottish Parliament, and they love to tell stories around the family fireplace, and one of the stories they would tell about returning home one night to see 16 robbers in 1692, who he successfully fought off. Must have been quite some story. His son, Sir John Clark now, second baronet, was a lawyer. Most of the Maxwells were destined to, most of the Clarks were destined to become lawyers. Maxwell himself was, his career was going to be as a lawyer until, as he described it, I thought it was another sort of law, the laws of nature, that I was destined to study. Thank goodness. World-class musician, one of the best composers ever produced by Scotland. He didn't ever perform in public because it was improper for someone of his status to perform in public. And an antiquarian, he wrote a 6-volume history of Britain, entirely in Latin. Quite an accomplishment. Now we'll go over on the right. You remember there's that uncle, John Clark of Eldon, that I said had a huge influence on British history. He had very good artists, a lot of good artists in the family line here. He has copper etchings in the British Museum. This is Maxwell's great-grand-uncle. And he owned coal mines. And he was wondering, you got the coal mines here, the rocks, the coals in layers. How did it get there? Why is there layers? And one of his friends, James Hutton, wondered the same thing. So they would go around to outcroppings. Sir George Clark would would go with them as well sometimes. And they'd go around and look at outcroppings of rock and try to figure out how they came from. And the idea Hutton came up with was, gee, maybe all the rock kind of wears down and goes into the ocean, settles down, pressed down, becomes rock over incredible periods of time, and then is pushed back up. And on his deathbed, in great pain, James Hutton wrote Theory of the Earth, expressing this idea, founding document of modern geology. He was also an expert on naval combat. And he tested his theory. He never once stepped a foot on a ship. He tested his theories out with model sailboats in a pond. This is the day of sail, no steam. So you got to go by the wind. The wind is important. And we can see here, in fact, he's holding a naval chart. There's ships in the background. And the strategy he came up with, which I'll describe in a second, was only used in 3 battles. the Battle of Chesapeake, the Battle of the Nile, and the greatest and nearly final sailing ship battle of all time, the Battle of Trafalgar. In the Battle of Trafalgar, the strategy that Lord Admiral Nelson used to defeat, I'll give you the background here. Port of Cadiz, Spain, under Napoleonic France, the entire French and Spanish, almost the entire French and Spanish fleet are blockaded in port. Almost the entire British fleet is outside waiting for them to come out. They finally come out. The strategy used by Nelson to defeat the French is superior numbers, French and Spanish fleet. Normally, what the strategy was, you'd have a line of battle. The ships form a line, and they come up closer and closer until they're in cannon range, and then try to blow each other out of the water. They know this is going to happen, so the warships are built with very thick sides. So cannonballs more or less just bounce off until you get really close. What John Clark of Eldon decided, what you can do is come up at right angles, break into two groups and come up at right angles. You take a blistering fire when you're doing this, because the cannons can fire from the enemy can fire at you, but you don't have any way to really fire back at them. But then what you do is you cut the line, and as you cut the line, the rears, the sterns of the ship are very, very light. Pow, 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 pow. You can really nail them. And that was used successfully in these three battles, and as a result, direct result of this battle, the British obtained superiority on the oceans for the next century. Figure out what I did with my pointer. Okay. Lord Nelson, if you want to see Lord Nelson, go to the exact geographic center of London, Trafalgar Square. There's a 100-foot Nelson's column. Nelson is on top of the column. He had lost one arm in the previous battle, and he lost his life in this battle. Maxwell's grandfather rather, the same name as Maxwell, James Clerk Maxwell, was a captain in the East India Navy. And at this time, British or sailors typically didn't know how to swim. If your ship sunk, you either grabbed on something that floated or you drowned. Those were the two options. So Maxwell's grandfather, his ship sunk in the Hooghly, a river port near Calcutta, north of Calcutta. And they sank, and he grabbed onto his bagpipes and floated in with his bagpipes. Once he got into shore, he started playing, as they described it, in an uncouth fit. Two purposes. One was to act as a homing beacon for the other shipwrecked sailors. The second was to keep the tigers and the hungry tigers in the jungle from eating him, which fortunately he was successful. The captain's youngest son, John, is Maxwell's father. This brings us to the cousin, off in the right-hand corner, cousin Jemima, a very precious gift to us. We're so fortunate to have her involved with Maxwell. Born Jemima Wedderburn, married named Blackburn. She married a professor at the University of Glasgow who was one of the pioneers of photography. This is a picture. This is a photograph, not a painting. She did a lot of paintings that we had. And exhibited paintings worldwide, world-class artist, mostly watercolor. And I like to, one thing I like to do with good photographs or also the good paintings, I'll show you a few of them, is to read people. You know, you're playing poker, you try to read the person next to you. Does he or she really have a full house, or are they bluffing? You try to read the expressions. Ignore the dress, ignore the hairstyle, because those concepts change year to year, even day to day. Look at the facial expression, especially the eyes. What kind of person is she? And what I read when I look at those eyes is I see someone who sees everything. You do not bluff this lady. And in fact, she has a photographic memory. She could see, artists might shoot a bird, stuff it, pose it, and paint it. She didn't do that. She would sit by the nest, wait for a pose, and when she saw the pose that she wanted, paint every detail, including the expressions on the face. You can read the expressions on the faces that she paints. She did a lot of painting of birds. This is a European cuckoo. Look at the expression on its face. The cuckoo is a parasitic bird. It lays eggs in the nests of other birds. It looks like it's trying to be troublesome there, doesn't it? World-class artist. We have a number of paintings by her, which I will show as we go through this. Maxwell's father, John Clark Maxwell, changed his last name to Maxwell, inheriting the estate. He lived with his mother until 1824 at 14 India Street. 14 India Street, I'll show you a picture in a second, is today owned by the James Clark Maxwell Foundation. And if you ever go to Edinburgh, having spent your lifetime working with Maxwell's equations, I would consider that a required stop. You need to call ahead though, because it's not open on regular hours, but they love to open up the museum and have guests come in and check things out. It is an amazing place. You must go there. In 1480, they show you the room that Maxwell was likely born in fact. Married Frances Kay in 1826, 2 years after his mother's death. He needed somebody to do the laundry or something. But Frances Kay was an incredibly valuable person, an important person in Maxwell's youth. Frances is on the right here with the dark hair, and her sister, Miss Jane Kay. She never married. To help you remember, I'll say his mother's cute little sister, so you don't have to remember the name. His name is Miss Jane Kay. And try to read the expressions on their faces too. This was painted by an uncle on the Kay side, another world-class painter. Read the expression on, ignore the hairstyle, ignore the dress. Read the expression on her face, especially the eyes. And what I see there is someone who is intelligent, strong, caring, protective. And look at her little sister, Miss Jane. Similar, but not quite the same adjectives. There's some amazing ladies that were involved in Maxwell's youth. Well, they got married, she became pregnant and gave birth to Elizabeth, who did not survive. And then on the 13th of June, 1831, she gave birth to James Clark Maxwell. Here is mother and son. You can see mother, same expression. You can read the same expression on the face and the eyes. And a little older now. And there is young Maxwell. I can't see too much from that. I can't really read much out of Maxwell's expression here. He's about 3 years old or so. And notice the hands. And any mother will tell you that there's two kinds of kids. There's kids that want to cling to mommy, and there's kids that want to be someplace else getting into trouble. What kind was Maxwell? He wanted to be someplace else getting into trouble. So I don't think the artist had too much luck getting young Maxwell to pose for this painting. This is the earliest known image of Maxwell. It's a pencil sketch. But we got a good expression on the eyes here. Look at those eyes. Any mother will tell you this kid's going to be a handful. He's going to be getting into all kinds of trouble, and indeed he did. And look what he's holding on. He's holding on to an owl. Look at the expression of that owl's face. It is terrifying. I would be terrified too if I were in the clutches of a 2-year-old like that. Maxwell did have a thumb. The owl did not eat the thumb. And at first I thought this was a stuffed owl, but it turns out Jemima, the lady who painted all the birds, she had 2 pet owls. I think this is one of her pet owls. Down here, trapped under one foot, is a frog, and over here is a salamander. Okay, so Maxwell's father inherits the estate on the death of his father. It's in Middleby, Kirkcudbrightshire in Scotland. 120 kilometers to Glenlair, 2 days by horse and carriage. Steam trains are not yet in the picture. They will be a little later. This is in Edinburgh's up here. Kirkcudbrightshire is down here. And it's on the River Ure. Ure W means Ure water. You follow it up, and right there is where they're going to build. It doesn't exist yet. They're going to build the manor house, the estate, and they're going to call it Glenlair. Just to the east is Dumfries. Just off the map is Lockerbie. We went there by train first time. I think it was 2005, and it was about an hour by train to Lockerbie. Lockerbie by car another hour or so. Take a GPS if you go. We've gone there a couple times even with professional drivers. They get lost. We have to pull out the GPS and say, go that way. So on the way, be sure to stop at Lockerbie by car or by train. In 1988, a terrorist bomb took down Pan Am Flight 103. 288 people died, including 35 Syracuse University students. When you go there, just ask for directions. Locals will be happy to point you to where to go. So, now we're at Glen Lair. There is no manor house, there's no place to live, and they're going to build one. This is a sketch. It's in a biography, an 1882 biography by Maxwell's longtime friend, Lewis Campbell. And it's only available in the rare book rooms of large libraries. If you want a copy of it, just go to our website. I scanned and OCR'd the whole thing. You can read about Maxwell's life directly from someone who knew Maxwell just about his entire lifetime. And this is a sketch in that book. It is taken directly from a watercolor by Jemima. I don't have the watercolor here for this one, but for the sketches where I do have the watercolors, the sketch is very accurate. And what do we have here? We have women folk are picking stones. I grew up on a farm. I've done this. It is, you pick the stones to make it easier to till the soil. And it is hard, dirty, back-breaking work. Why does John Clark have the women folk picking the stones? Is he mean or something? But now look up here on the hill. Glen Lair is built on a hill. It has a very deep basement. And you see the men folk are actually digging here. I think they're digging the basement for Glen Lair. If you ever tried to dig into hard, stony, clayey soil, that's even harder work than picking a stone. So the women folk are actually doing the easier of the two jobs. This is a picture of Glen Lair after it was fully built, taken by Maxwell himself a few years before his death. There are still cattle in the field here. If you go visit and you go out in this field, there's a little gate in the fence there. Be sure to make sure there's no bulls in the field, or you'll find yourself leaving the field very quickly. There was a fire in 1928, and the firemen came. They didn't have any water. All they could do was help carry things out. And this is why we saw it in I think that was just before 2000. I think was the first time we went there. The fire had destroyed the roof. It wasn't completely destroyed, but the roof collapsed and then cleared away. This roof is in danger of collapse. You notice there's even a tree growing there. The foyer is has a roof that's in very bad shape. Doors and windows all gone. Very sad to see. Closer up picture of it here. You can see the foyer. Now the roof is gone at this point of the foyer. The roof is gone. You can see that little tree, things growing. You can see how the roof is sagging. This part was built by Maxwell. This part was built by Maxwell's father. And this part is actually servants' quarters, which has been restored and is presently private residence. I was able to stay there a couple nights a few years back. I listened carefully to see if I hear any demons opening and closing doors, but I didn't hear any. This is the foyer, the entrance foyer, which Maxwell himself undoubtedly walked in many times. I walked in there and turned right, looked down, and pulled up the tarp off the floor, and this is what I saw. Just to put your mind at ease, the tile floor has been fully restored now. This is my first view of it. And notice it's interesting. Well, colors that Maxwell picked for this tile floor. I'm assuming Maxwell actually designed the tile floor. Red. No, there's actually, when we cleaned it off, there's actually 3 shades of red. It's kind of brownish, but I'll call it red. Green and blue and white. Red, green, and blue. Why did Maxwell pick colors like that? And look how they sort of form a circle. And then there's another circle here, and then another circle here. Interesting. Why did Maxwell do that? We will return to both of those mysteries. Keep that one in mind. So that is a view from the distance of Glen Lair. This was a tragedy happening. And my company has been fairly successful. My success is entirely built on Maxwell's equations. I felt like I owed something to Maxwell here. So this was too big of a project just for me. I got together with the MTT Society, AP Society, European Microwave Association, and we all kicked in a fair sum of money, and we did restoration. Repointed the walls, restored the roof, put a roof back on here, and today the building still needs floors inside. So if anybody feels like putting a stamp on history, this would be a good option to do it. Building will be there for our children and our grandchildren to see. And this is a view again from the distance more recently in 2012. This portion is the Maxwell build has been restored. This portion now, I haven't seen it yet, but this portion has been restored as private residence. That was built by Maxwell's father. So things are really looking up for Glen Lair right now. Now the bridge down here was built by Maxwell's uncle, David Kay. I'll show a picture of there's some swimming down here that you can do. I'll show a picture of that. Maxwell loved to swim. Okay, 1837. Maxwell was born in 1831, so Maxwell's 6 years old, plus or minus. And so Maxwell's in here somewhere. He's always saying things like, show me how it does. He wanted to see how things worked. And so where is Maxwell? Well, okay, too young. Maxwell's around 6. Grown-ups. Dancer, violin player. Whoa, there's Maxwell. And notice he's not looking at the dancer. Maxwell is looking at the violin player. He's wondering how the violin works. This image, taken from a Jemima painting, is actually foreshadowing, although Jemima did not realize it at the time. How does a violin work? You draw a string, you draw your bow across the strings, and the strings vibrate. The strings vibrate transversely because the string has shear strength. You pull one string to the side, it pulls the next section, and it vibrates back and forth. That's a transverse vibration. That vibrates the sound box. Sound box vibrates the air. Air has no shear strength, so the air can't vibrate transversely. It can only be a pressure wave, only a longitudinal wave. And that goes out and you hear the longitudinal waves. We'll return to this topic in a few moments as well. We think of Maxwell as doing a lot of theoretical work. He actually did a considerable amount of experimental work. I'll show some of the experimental apparatus in a bit. Here he's showing it at an early age with making baskets with the help of some servants. He also, remember, Jemima's a world-class artist growing up right now. He did the concept and built the apparatus, and she did the paintings. 10 frames of animation here. And when you put it in whatever gadget it was, we don't have the gadget that they put this in. Or at least I haven't seen it. And turn the crank, that's what you see. Pretty cool. One thing, those of you who are experts in horses running, there was a big controversy whether a horse had all 4 feet off the ground at the same time while it's running. You can't see it when the horse is running. They waited the advent of high-speed photography to figure out that horses did actually have 4 feet off the ground at one time, which is not the case here. So Jemima acknowledged that she did get the horses wrong, but it was beautiful animation anyway. Here Maxwell is teaching, with the aid of his father, teaching his dog some tricks. The trick here is okay, the dog, Maxwell always had a dog his entire lifetime. The dog was always called Toby, as described in the Lewis Campbell book. This was a terrier of the mustard kind called Toby, Tobin, Tobbs, or Tobbit, according to the moment's humor. To illustrate how Maxwell would get into trouble sometimes, another story that they told in this biography by Campbell. One evening at Glen Lair, just as the maidservant was coming in with a tea tray, imagine it being a little bit on the dark side, Jamesy blew out the light in the narrow passageway and lay down across the doorway. Must have been quite a mess. For fun, Lewis Campbell also describes, Maxwell would like to slide on the Our, that's the river, in times of frost, to leap ditches, to climb trees of sorts, to see them felled, and have grand game at getting upon them while they're falling, to take wasp nests on hot days in July, to blow soap bubbles and marvel at their changing hues. Now, I grew up on a farm. I did a lot of those things. I never took a wasp nest on a hot day in July. But talking about the soap bubbles and the changing hues, this is indeed foreshadowing of future work. Why do soap bubbles have changing hues? Okay, let's drop back into the 1500s, 15 to 1600s. Isaac Newton said, light is a particle. Huygens and Hooke said, no, light is a wave. And the argument got really, really vicious. The hues on a soap bubble, a fellow by the name of Reynolds number? A fellow by the name of Reynolds, just before Maxwell's time, had figured out that if light is a wave, comes in, hits the first surface, bounce off the soap bubble, some of it continues on, hits the second surface, bounce off, and they interfere, constructively or destructively. And that's why the soap bubbles have colors, if light's a wave. Okay, cool. Looks like light must be a wave. There are some problems with that, which we'll come up with in a bit. Here he is.